Uh, I've been sitting in my seat nervously for the past 30 minutes because I don't have prepared remarks. I've had a really rough 24 hours, and but I knew it was important for me to be here. And so instead, I want to tell you a story about risk. In 1996, I had just finished college, and I went to work for the organization that essentially shaped me as an organizer, taught me everything I knew about politics and about community organizing and so much about life. It's called the 21st Century Youth Leadership Movement. And as a part of that organization, we had a camp that we held every year where we had young people come from around the country. And I had been coming to that camp since I was 14. And now at 22, I was running the camp. That summer, I met a little girl who I call Heaven publicly. And Heaven was about 12 or 13. She was new to our camp, and she was new to our rules. And she was, in many ways, what we call in the South, a hellion. She was a handful, and I spent a lot of time that summer creating a relationship with Heaven, holding her really close to me, giving her lots of stuff to do, trying to sort of bring her into the fold. We have a session that we call Sister to Sister every year, where the girls are separated and they get to talk about anything they want. It's open and it's free and it's no judgment, and they tell all kinds of stories and they ask all kinds of questions of the counselors. But every year, almost like clockwork, it happened when I was a young person, at some point in the night, the conversation shifts, and because some young person will disclose about their experience with sexual violence. And part of that is because it's a safe space, and it's a space where the young people feel protected enough to talk about it. This year, when I was in the program, I didn't talk about what happened to me. I come from a Caribbean family where there are very clear, unspoken rules that say our business is our business. And so as much as I felt safe in that place, I never felt compelled enough to tell my story. But I would, console my friends and listen to them and do what I could to support them. And so this year, I watched Heaven become me in that space. And I watched her listen to the girls as they talked about their experiences, and I watched her try to figure out if this is a place where she should insert herself, and I watched the wheels turning in her head, trying to figure out if she should tell her story or not. I could feel her story on the tip of her tongue, but she never said anything. And then the following day, she found me very early in the morning and demanded to speak to me. She said, "Ms. T, I have to talk to you." But I knew what she was coming to tell me, and I really did not have the space for it. I was young, and I had not really come to grips with the things that I experienced as a young person. And so I ran from her for most of the day. But this child kept after me. And finally, she cornered me and said, "Ms. T, I have to talk to you." And she didn't know what I was going to say. She didn't know how I was going to respond. But she definitely risked it all to tell me what had happened to her at the hands of her mother's boyfriend. And I listened for as long as I could. And when I couldn't listen anymore, I sent her off to another counselor and said, "I can't help you." And I watched the disappointment in her face. But I still couldn't tell her anything different. Because the whole time she was telling her story, my mind was racing, saying, I don't know what to say. I'm not a counselor, and I'm not a therapist. I don't want to say the wrong thing. But what was coming up in my spirit was, this happened to me too. This thing that she was describing, not exactly the same way, not by the same people, but this thing had happened to me too. And I wanted so badly to share that with her, but I didn't take the risk. I'm often accused of courage. I'm often told how courageous I am to stand up, but when I think about taking risks, I think about children like Heaven, who really risked it all to tell me something that she had been holding in her body for God knows how many years. And because she took that risk, even though I didn't respond in the moment, I did make a commitment that I was going to figure out what my response should be. And I was going to start with figuring out how to deal with my own stuff so that it didn't become a hindrance when this moment came again. And in a few years after that, when we started this organization, I met more and more girls who took the same risk, who came to me and told me the things that were happening to them in all kinds of ways, or they didn't tell me, and I recognized the violence that was happening in their lives. And so then I took a risk to go to my community and say, we have to do something about this. This can't be right. Yes, we have to deal with these individual girls and their needs individually as survivors, but what do we do with hundreds of children in our community who are experiencing sexual violence? How do we not have a community response? What I always understood from the people who taught me to stand up for justice is that individual risk has to be met with collective courage. These children, these young people who stood up are no different than the millions and millions of people who stood up almost 2 years ago to say Me Too. We don't recognize the risk that it takes to disclose. Even if you're sitting behind your computer and typing out 2 words. I'm sorry. Yesterday, my stepfather was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. He's gonna die. We don't know how long we have, but we know what the fate is. And it keeps making me think about time. So many people stood up and said Me Too 2 years ago, and we have really paid them no attention. This movement has ballooned into a global phenomenon on the backs of people who survive sexual violence. It is our labor that makes this word, these 2 words, household name. Thank you. We cannot waste time on distractions. We've never had a moment in this country where everybody paid so much attention to sexual violence. And I don't know how long it's gonna last, but I know that while it lasts, we cannot waste time. For every single person who stood up and took the risk of saying Me Too, we have to meet them with our collective courage. And that courage can show up in so many ways. You don't have to be on the front lines. You don't have to dedicate your whole life to it, but you do have to be dedicated to what we need to shift the culture that allows sexual violence to be as pervasive as it is. We should be asking questions about the lives of the individuals who said Me Too, not about the livelihood of the people who've been accused. Until we are committed to changing this permissive culture that allows sexual violence to be so rampant, we will not see an end to this violence, but I do know that it's possible. And I'm not just optimistic. I believe with every fiber of my being that it is possible because I've seen culture shift before. I've seen what happens when we come together collectively and make up our mind that we will not stand for a thing. People who look like me are free in this country because of it. Women vote in this country because of it. I'm just asking people to take the risk with me. I don't need to be rewarded for risk. I need people to join me on the front lines and make a commitment to figure out what risk looks like in your life. Don't let these people who raised their hands so bravely 2 years ago continue to have their hands raised without having a response to it. So I don't, I don't have anything else to say. I'm sorry.